The forgotten signal. The universe had long since forgotten the name of Earth. It had been 4,000 years since humanity's last contact with the stars. Once, humans had been the dominant force across the galaxies, a people known for their unparalleled ingenuity and relentless determination. But after the devastating wars that nearly tore the galaxy apart, they disappeared. Some said they had gone extinct, others that they had retreated to the farthest corners of space, leaving behind only ruins and whispers. Now the galaxy was dying. Len Prime, once the shining jewel of interstellar civilization, now lay in darkness. The streets, which had once been alive with laughter and the hum of commerce, were now silent, save for the occasional distant cry of those few who still clung to life. The capital city's towering spires, once symbols of peace and prosperity, were now jagged remnants of destruction, twisted by the force of an unstoppable enemy. The Drone. A race of insectoid creatures, ruthless and cunning, the Drone were unlike anything the galaxy had encountered. Their ships, sharp and angular, cut through fleets like blades through paper. Their soldiers were relentless, their numbers infinite. Planets that resisted were scorched, their populations eradicated. Resistance was futile. In the dimly lit council chambers beneath the ruins of Len Prime, the last leaders of the United Galactic Alliance gathered. Their faces were grim, their eyes tired, haunted by the relentless march of the Drone. Around a massive, circular table, they discussed their fate, if it could even be called that anymore. Councillor Darv, a tall, spindly being from the Kala race, slammed his fist on the table in frustration. His voice trembled, not with rage, but with the deep weight of fear. We cannot hold them off any longer. Another 20 systems have fallen in the past week. Our fleets are scattered. Our armies are in retreat. Our people are dying. Zoravox, a young but fierce general from the Aronian species, stood up, her blue skin shimmering in the dim light. Then we must do what we should have done long ago, she said, her voice firm and unwavering. A tense silence filled the room. Every council member turned to her, disbelief and fear written on their faces. You don't mean? Councillor Grill, a stout, fur-covered representative from the Exum species, began, his voice trailing off. The humans, Zora's words cut through the silence like a blade. A murmur rippled through the room. The humans. They were a name of legend, spoken of in hushed tones. Once the most powerful and feared species in the galaxy, humanity had vanished after their devastating wars. Some believed they had been wiped out. Others thought they had retreated into hiding, far from the eyes of the galaxy. But the truth was that no one knew. Councillor Elra, an elder of the crystalline Valia, shook her head. We swore never to contact them again. They were too dangerous, too unpredictable. Do you not remember the devastation they caused? Zara's gaze remained steady. And do you not see the devastation we face now? The Drone are far worse than anything we've encountered. If we don't act, there will be no galaxy left to protect. But what if they turn on us? Asked Dee, his voice low and hesitant. Zora leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with resolve. What choice do we have? The council members exchanged uncertain glances, the weight of their decision pressing heavily on their shoulders. They knew Zora was right, but still, the memories of humanity's wrath were fresh in their minds. Yet, it was clear that there was no other hope. They were running out of time. Unbeknownst to them, Zara had already taken matters into her own hands. Without consulting the council, she had sent a distress signal to the last known coordinates of humanity, a desperate call for help that might very well be their only chance for survival. Light years away, in the forgotten depths of the galaxy, an ancient sentinel stirred to life. A massive machine, built by humans before their disappearance, had remained dormant for millennia. Known as Vanguard, it had been programmed to protect humanity's legacy and to awaken when the galaxy was in peril. The signal had reached its destination. Vanguard processed the message with remarkable efficiency. Its calculations were swift, its purpose clear. Humanity was needed again. This introduction sets the tone for the return of humanity, blending mystery with tension and laying the groundwork for their inevitable return. The stage is set for the first human response to the drone threat, leading to the awakening of human forces in later parts of the story. The forgotten warriors awaken. In the depths of the universe, light years away from the decimated heart of the galaxy, a hidden outpost stirred into action. The system, once thriving with secret human research and military outposts, had long been abandoned, forgotten by the galaxy, forgotten even by its creators. The cold, lifeless moons orbiting a dying star now seemed to pulse with purpose as ancient machines began to hum with life. For millennia, this outpost had waited, dormant, as its creators had intended. Buried deep beneath layers of rock and dust, shielded by cloaking technology so advanced it was nearly invisible even to the most sophisticated alien scans, humanity's last defense was about to awaken. At the center of it all stood the Vanguard, a colossal sentient machine that had been built to monitor and react to the galaxy's most dire situations. Programmed with the last vestiges of human tactical knowledge and strategy, it had waited for a moment like this, when the galaxy teetered on the brink of extinction. And now the moment had arrived. Vanguard's processors spun to life, the machine's immense AI quickly analyzing the distress signal. It had been years, centuries even, since it last activated any of its systems, but now the orders were clear. Humanity was needed once again. Vanguard's first directive was simple: awaken the fleet. Lights blinked across a network of hidden bunkers scattered throughout the system, deep in the silence of space. Massive cryo chambers that had housed humanity's finest soldiers and scientists began to hum and wire as power slowly returned to life. The first signs of movement echoed throughout the complex, strange, mechanical groans as metal doors began to slide open. The sleepers were awakening. Admiral Elias Kane was the first to stir. His eyes snapped open, and for a moment, the world was nothing but dark shadows and disorientation. The last thing he remembered was leading humanity's fleets into their final, catastrophic war, one that had ended in devastation. Now, as he pushed himself up from the cold cryopod, a mixture of confusion and instinct took over. His mind was sharp again, his body aching from long disuse, but his resolve remained unbroken. The Admiral stood up, his long, lean frame rising from the pod with quiet strength. As the pod opened fully, a familiar voice echoed through the chamber. It was the Vanguard's AI, a voice that had once guided human forces with precision and clarity, now tinged with urgency. "Admiral Kane, welcome back. The galaxy needs you." Kane rubbed his eyes, trying to clear the fog in his mind. He looked around the chamber, noting the still, lifeless figures of his crew standing in cryopods next to him. These were the warriors of humanity, frozen in time, waiting for the day when their strength would once again be required. Now, that day had come. "We were supposed to be extinct," Kane muttered under his breath, but even as the words left his mouth, his determination began to return. He had been a leader of men, one who had seen the depths of war, but also the heights of humanity's greatest triumphs. He wasn't about to let the galaxy fall without a fight. "Wake them up," he ordered, his voice cutting through the cold air like a sharp blade. "All of them." A resurrected fleet. As the cryo chambers powered up one by one, the remaining human fleet began to stir. Massive dreadnoughts, their sleek, dark hulls glowing faintly in the dim light, slowly powered on. The ships had been dormant for centuries, hidden in places the galaxy had long since forgotten. Some were buried under planets, others cloaked in the shadows of moons, their weapons systems cold and inactive. Now, they began to hum with life, their engines roaring to life as though they had never been asleep. Admiral Kane made his way to the command deck of the flagship, the Eclipse. The sight of the massive dreadnought coming to life was nothing short of awe-inspiring. It was a testament to humanity's brilliance, engineered to withstand everything the galaxy could throw at it. On the bridge, Kane found his first officer, Commander Ryan Cole, already at his station. Cole's face was haggard from the long years of slumber, but his eyes were sharp and determined. "Admiral," Cole greeted him with a nod. "We've got full power restored. All systems are online." Kane nodded, his gaze drifting to the holographic display that now illuminated the center of the command deck. The state of the galaxy was worse than they had imagined. The drone had swept through half of the known galaxy, leaving nothing but death in their wake. "It's worse than we feared," Cole continued, his voice grim. "The drone are relentless. They've taken over more than 50 star systems in the past 2 months. The United Galactic Alliance, they're barely hanging on. We've got to act quickly." Kane's jaw tightened. The memories of the war that had nearly destroyed humanity were still fresh in his mind. It had been a war that had shattered everything: trust, alliances, even hope. But they had endured, and now, the galaxy needed humanity once again. He had no intention of letting them down. "Set a course for the heart of the Alliance," Kane said, his voice filled with resolve. "It's time we reminded the galaxy what humanity is capable of. The first steps toward salvation." As the fleet prepared for launch, the silence of the long-forgotten system began to fade. Human ships, once silent and hidden, now roared to life. Their powerful engines ignited, sending shockwaves through the surrounding void. The awakening of humanity's fleet signaled the beginning of something monumental: the rise of the forgotten warriors. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge, staring out into the vast, star-filled expanse. The galaxy was in chaos, but it wasn't beyond saving. With the right strategy, with the right heart, humanity could turn the tide. But it wouldn't be easy. The drone were merciless, and they wouldn't give up easily. But humanity had faced impossible odds before, and they had always found a way. The Eclipse and the rest of the fleet began their journey, cutting through the void toward the remnants of the United Galactic Alliance. The battle for the galaxy was about to begin, and humanity was back to finish what had started. This part builds on the rising tension and excitement, giving the audience a sense of urgency and the overwhelming scale of the challenge ahead. It also hints at the inner strength and determination of humanity, setting the stage for their eventual clash with the drone. The reluctant allies. The vastness of space stretched endlessly before them, a dark sea that offered no solace. The human fleet, once forgotten, now moved with purpose, cutting through the void like a jagged blade. Admiral Elias Kane stood at the command deck of the Eclipse, his gaze fixed on the stars. They were heading toward the heart of the United Galactic Alliance, the dying capital, Len Prime. It had been 4,000 years since humanity had been a part of this galaxy's conflict. The Alliance had long since turned their backs on the humans, fearful of their power and unpredictability. To be honest, they hadn't expected humanity to return, but now their last hope was sitting at the helm of the Eclipse, a human warship built for one thing: victory. The holographic map on the bridge showed the galaxy's state: dark spots where the drone had wiped out entire systems, and faint lights where the Alliance still held on struggling. The Eclipse's engines hummed softly as the ship powered through space, carrying the last remnants of humanity's military might. Kane's fleet was not large, but it was efficient. Every ship was a testament to human ingenuity, armed with technology and strategies long thought lost to time. "Admiral," Commander Ryan Cole spoke, his voice steady as ever despite the gravity of their mission. "We've intercepted a message from the Alliance. They're expecting us. And they're not happy." Kane raised an eyebrow. Not happy. Cole glanced at the communications console. A transmission flickered into view, a crackling voice breaking through the static. "This is General Zaravox of the United Galactic Alliance. To the human fleet, do not approach Len Prime. Your kind is no longer welcome. We remember what you did. Stay away." Zaravox. Kane had heard of her, a young but fierce general of the Aronian species. She was one of the last leaders of the Alliance, a woman whose reputation for courage was rivaled only by her distrust of humanity. He knew what she was referring to: humanity's previous wars, the devastation they had caused across the galaxy. "It seems we've been forgotten in more ways than one," Cole muttered, glancing at Kane. "Let's not make it worse by firing on them," Kane replied, his voice calm but firm. "We came here to help, not to fight our old allies. Open a channel. Let's see if we can get through." A galaxy on the brink. As the eclipse moved closer to the planet's orbit, the once bustling capital of Len Prime loomed in the distance. The once pristine world was now marred by scars of war, with broken structures jutting from the landscape, a silent testament to the destructive power of the drone. Yet, even in the wreckage, the spirit of the Alliance still flickered, however faintly. The few survivors left had turned their efforts toward a last-ditch defense, but they knew they were losing. On the ground, General Zara Vox stood at the command center, looking out over the ruins of Len Prime through a cracked viewport. The galaxy had changed in her lifetime. The once proud and united species of the Galactic Alliance were now fractured, each world left to fend for itself. But none of them had the strength to stand against the drone. She turned as a communication officer entered the room. "General, we've received a response from the human fleet." Zara's expression darkened. "I told them to stay away. We don't need their help." "But General," the officer hesitated, "it's not just any human fleet. It's the Eclipse. They say the humans have returned." A chill ran down Zora's spine. The Eclipse. The flagship of humanity's last war fleet, the one ship no one had seen for millennia. She felt a strange mixture of dread and curiosity. Could this be a trap? Was this a vengeful remnant of humanity seeking to finish the destruction they had once started? "We need to talk to them," Zara said, her voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. "We can't risk alienating them before we even know their intentions. Prepare for a direct transmission." First contact. The transmission from the Eclipse came through loud and clear. On the holographic display, Admiral Kane appeared, his face weathered but resolute. Behind him, the bridge of the Eclipse hummed with life. "General Vox," Kane's voice was calm but carrying the weight of history. "We've come to help. We've been watching the drone's destruction for years, and we're not about to let this galaxy fall without a fight. The humans are back. Your fleet needs us." Zara studied the image of the man who had once led humanity's forces, her heart heavy with suspicion. The humans had a reputation, one of power, but also of recklessness. The galaxy had not forgotten the wars they had waged, the devastation they had caused. Could they really be trusted again? "You don't understand, Kane," Zara said, her voice sharp. "The drone are not just an enemy. They are a force beyond anything we've faced before. You can't just throw your fleets into the fray and expect to win." "Then let us help you," Kane replied firmly. "I know what the drone can do, but I also know what humanity is capable of when we are united. We don't have time for distrust. The galaxy is burning." Zara felt the weight of his words. Deep down, she knew that the Alliance's forces were scattered and broken. They were fighting a losing battle, one they couldn't win on their own. If humanity truly had the strength to challenge the drone, it was a chance the Alliance couldn't afford to ignore. After a long pause, Zara spoke, her tone softening just a fraction. "We'll allow you to dock at the perimeter. But if you betray us, Kane, there will be no second chances." "We won't betray you," Kane assured her. "We're not here to start wars. We're here to win them." A fragile alliance. The human fleet arrived at the outskirts of Len Prime's shattered orbit, their massive ships casting long shadows over the broken planet below. The sight of the Eclipse among the debris was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The humans had returned, but could they really be trusted? Zara watched as the human ships slowly docked with the remnants of the Alliance's stations. Her soldiers were on edge, each one wondering if this was a trap. But Zara held her ground. The galaxy had no more time for pride, no more room for hesitation. If humanity could save them, they will accept whatever help they could get. The fragile alliance had been forged. The spark of war. The air in the war room was thick with anticipation. For the first time in 4,000 years, humans were standing side by side with the very beings they had once fought against. The Eclipse had successfully docked, and Admiral Elias Kane now stood before a holographic map of Len Prime's battered orbital defenses. Around the table, representatives from the Galactic Alliance, including General Zara Vox, observed with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. Kane's presence was imposing, his reputation echoing through every word and gesture. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, his tone was always certain, a reflection of the harsh lessons humanity had learned during their final war. "This is how we win," Kane began, tapping the holographic display. The map flickered, highlighting the positions of the Dron fleets encircling Len Prime. "We've seen their tactics. The Dron don't attack with brute force. They suffocate you, tighten their grip until there's nothing left to fight for. But we faced that before." Zara Vox, who had initially dismissed the idea of working with humanity, leaned forward. "So you're suggesting we simply outlast them? They've already taken half of known space. The Alliance can barely hold its own defenses." Kane's eyes met hers. "You fought them as a collective, but they're not facing humanity this time. We fight smart. We fight with everything we've learned in 4,000 years. This isn't about brute strength. It's about precision, surprise, and disruption." A murmur swept through the room as Kane zoomed in on the Dron fleet positions. He outlined the plan, a series of hit-and-run tactics designed to spread the Dron forces thin. The Eclipse and its fleet would serve as a decoy, drawing the Dron toward a series of uninhabited moons on the edge of the system. Meanwhile, the Alliance's remaining fleets would target their weak points, strategic supply lines, communications hubs, and fuel stations. Kane's voice was calm, but it carried an underlying urgency. "We cannot afford to fight them head-on. The Dron are relentless, but they have weaknesses. We strike them where they least expect it, and we keep them on the defensive." Tension among the ranks. While the plan was being finalized, General Vox remained skeptical. She had seen too many plans crumble under the weight of idealism. She had seen too many wars fought and lost by trusting in unproven strategies. The idea of working with humanity, whose previous wars had nearly torn the galaxy apart, felt almost sacrilegious. She still remembered the stories of how the human fleets had once laid waste to entire worlds. "Your strategy is sound, but it relies too heavily on unpredictability," Zara said, her voice controlled but firm. "The Dron adapt quickly. We've seen it firsthand. One mistake, and the whole galaxy could fall into their hands." Kane didn't flinch. "I've seen humanity fail. I've seen our mistakes, but I've also seen us bounce back. And I'm not about to let the galaxy burn because of our past. I'm not asking for your trust. I'm asking for a chance." The room fell silent, each person processing the weight of his words. There was a long pause before the Andronian representative, Councillor Darv, spoke up. His voice was cold, but it carried a sense of finality. "Trust is a luxury we no longer have. We either fight or we die." His words rang out, and a sense of resolve seemed to settle over the group. No one in the room doubted the severity of their situation. Time was running out. The Dron would not wait for them to find common ground. "We'll need to train our soldiers together," Zara said after a moment. "I still don't trust them, but I won't let our people die because of prejudice." Kane nodded. "Good. Training starts now." Unlikely alliances. Over the next few days, the human and alliance forces began their uneasy training sessions. Humans were known for their combat prowess, but the species that made up the Galactic Alliance each had their own unique fighting styles. The Aronian species, for example, had a fluid, almost dance-like combat technique that emphasized agility over strength. The Exons fought with sheer power, their massive bodies making them nearly impervious to anything but the most advanced weaponry. Humans, however, fought with discipline, strategy, and an unwavering will to survive. The tension between the two groups was palpable. Human soldiers, once confident in their superiority, found themselves underestimating their allies. The Aronians, for instance, moved with an elegance that defied the brutality the humans were accustomed to. They struck with precision, their bodies flowing like water through the air. But their lack of brute force frustrated the human soldiers, who had grown up training for battles that valued strength as much as skill. Meanwhile, the Exans were a different breed entirely, standing nearly 3 meters tall, with fur-covered bodies and sharp claws. They were the epitome of raw physical power. The humans found it difficult to keep up with their speed and ferocity in close combat training, and many of the Alliance soldiers were worried about their lack of advanced technology, relying on physicality over intellect. It wasn't long before the clashes began. During one sparring session, a human soldier named Lieutenant Miravos faced off against an Exon warrior. The fight was fierce, the heavy blows of the Exon shaking the floor beneath them. Mira dodged and struck back, relying on her speed and agility to outmaneuver the Exon's brute strength. A glancing blow sent her sprawling, but she quickly recovered, her determination burning brightly. The Exon, for his part, was not used to facing such tenacity from the human soldiers. He paused, seemingly impressed by Mira's resilience, and stepped back to give her space. "I see why they sent you," the Exon said, his voice low but respectful. Mira wiped the sweat from her brow and smiled. "I'm not done yet." The calm before the storm. By the time the joint training exercise ended, there was a sense of quiet camaraderie between the human and Alliance forces. The differences in fighting style remained, but they had learned to respect each other's strengths. Zara, who had been watching the progress from the sidelines, felt a flicker of hope rise within her. Maybe, just maybe, the galaxy had a chance after all. As the ships prepared for battle, the alliances were tested further. The Drong were closing in on the outskirts of Len Prime. The time for planning had passed. The time for action had arrived. Kane stood on the bridge of the Eclipse, looking out over the now assembled fleet. The galaxy was watching them. They would either rise or fall together. "Let's show them what humanity is capable of," he said, his voice steady. And with that, the Eclipse and the newly allied forces moved into position, ready to strike. The first strike. The Eclipse hung in space like a shadow, a harbinger of what was to come. Admiral Elias Kane stood on the bridge, staring at the swirling expanse of Len Prime below. Its once pristine surface was now a grim reminder of the Drong's unrelenting march. The galaxy was fractured, the Alliance on the brink of collapse. Humanity had returned to answer the call, but the challenge they faced was like no war they had ever fought. The Drong were a new breed of enemy, relentless, strategic, and merciless. Yet Kane was unwavering in his resolve. The time had come to strike back. The plan in motion. Zara Vox stood at Kane's side, her blue skin shimmering under the bridge's dim lights. The tense energy in the air was palpable. She was the military strategist, the one who had been skeptical of humanity's return, but now she felt an undeniable sense of urgency. Their allies were no longer simply fighting to defend their homes. They were fighting for their very existence. This battle could determine the fate of every species in the galaxy. "We hit them hard and fast," Zara said, tapping her console. "A coordinated strike across the Drong's forward command centers will cripple their ability to mobilize. If we can cut off their communications, we can buy ourselves some time." Kane nodded. "That's the plan. But remember, the Drong don't fight with one mind. They're a collective, each unit working autonomously. Their communication methods are unlike anything we've faced before. We have to adapt on the fly." Zara looked at the holographic projection of the Drong fleet. The Drong didn't have traditional command ships. Instead, they operated through a decentralized, hive-like system. Kane had described it as fighting a swarm rather than an army, and Zara had learned to trust his instincts. "What's the status of the Alliance fleets?" Kane asked, turning toward Lieutenant Mira Vos, who had been coordinating the fleet's movements. Mira's fingers flew across the console, pulling up real-time data. "All ships are in position, sir. The Aronian and Exan fleets are ready to provide backup for the assault. The plan is to create a diversion. Our strike force will be the main offensive, while the backup fleets will keep the Dron engaged. Kane gave a grim smile. A classic two-pronged attack. Let's hope it works. Get the word out. I want everyone on standby. The Dron's silent menace. While the human and Alliance forces prepared for battle, the Dron were already on the move. They had been watching, waiting. The Dron weren't like the typical invader, ruthless but predictable. Instead, they were a calculated species, evolving with every encounter. Each new piece of intelligence they gathered became an asset, and the Dron had learned how to fight with precision and without mercy. The Dron fleet loomed over Len Prime, its black ships cutting through the dark expanse of space. The vast warships shimmered with an almost unnatural stillness, as if the void of space had become their home. Within the dark hulls of these ships, the drones waited in perfect silence. In the heart of the Dron fleet, at the center of a vast command chamber, the Hive Mother sat, her mind connected to every Dron ship and soldier. She was the embodiment of their will, the central intelligence that controlled their every move. She had been aware of the distress signal sent by the Alliance. She knew the humans had returned. The Hive Mother's voice, cold and dispassionate, rippled through the hive. The time has come to eradicate the last remnants of resistance. Deploy the warriors. Do not allow them to escape. She gave no further command. She did not need to. The Dron followed their directive without question, a swarm in perfect unison. First contact, the battle began just after the edge of the Dron fleet's perimeter. The Eclipse, leading the charge, sliced through the darkness, its sleek design cutting a sharp contrast against the vastness of space. Behind it, a dozen human warships emerged, their engines glowing with energy. The combined fleets of the Aronian and Exan species flanked them, forming a loose battle formation. Zoravox's voice crackled through Kane's comm. "We've reached the target coordinates, Admiral. The Dron haven't moved yet. They're holding position." Kane's gaze was focused on the cold, empty blackness in front of them. He could feel the weight of history pressing on him, the tension of 4,000 years of silence now about to be shattered. His mind was clear, his body focused. "We'll hit them with everything we have," Kane replied. "On my mark, release the torpedoes." A steady, calculated calm filled him. It had been years since he had led a fleet, but every lesson from humanity's war came rushing back. Every victory, every failure, every lesson learned the hard way. He wasn't just leading a fleet of ships, he was leading the last hope for the galaxy. "Mark," he shouted. At his command, dozens of torpedoes were launched in unison, streaking across the void toward the heart of the Dron fleet. The explosion of their impact seemed almost anticlimactic. The enemy fleet did not immediately retaliate, leaving the humans and their allies with the feeling that the Dron had been caught off guard. But that was the Dron's strategy. They didn't need to respond immediately. They needed only to observe, to learn, and to adapt. Chaos unleashed. Suddenly, the Dron ships reacted. What had seemed like an impervious wall of blackness now became a seething mass of movement. Smaller, agile ships broke off from the main fleet, darting toward the Eclipse and its allies. The Dron had anticipated the strike. "Brace for impact," Kane barked, his hand gripping the control panel. The battle erupted in a violent explosion of energy, light, and sound. The Eclipse shuddered under the force of incoming fire, its shields flickering under the intense assault. Human and Alliance ships returned fire, sending a volley of lasers and missiles toward the Dron. But the Dron were different. Their ships twisted and turned with unnerving fluidity, their weapons striking with surgical precision. The Eclipse took a direct hit, sending a wave of shock through the crew. Red alert lights blared across the bridge, but Kane remained steady. "Damage report," he shouted. A voice crackled through the comms. "Shields are down to 35%. Hull integrity is holding, but we've lost 2 of the forward plasma cannons. We're still operational, sir." Kane's jaw clenched. Divert all power to shields and weapons. We're not going down without a fight. As the eclipse continued to engage the Dron, Zora's fleet also found itself in a deadly struggle. The Dron had adapted. They had expected an attack and had planned accordingly. Zora watched in stunned silence as her forces began to fall back, forced into a defensive position they hadn't anticipated. "This is madness," Zora muttered, her fingers flying across her console. "They're too fast, too efficient." Kane's voice rang out, cutting through the chaos. "They're learning, and we have to do the same. Keep fighting, General. This battle is just beginning." A glimmer of hope. Amid the chaos, one thing became clear. The humans had not come to be pawns in someone else's war. They had come to take control of their destiny. For every setback, they adapted. For every loss, they gained new insight into the Dron's tactics. "We're not backing down," Kane muttered to himself, gripping the command chair tighter. "This isn't over yet." And it wasn't. The battle had only just begun. The tide turns. In the heart of the battle, where the stars themselves seemed to tremble under the fury of war, the eclipse rocked violently under another barrage of Dron fire. Admiral Elias Kane's knuckles were white as he gripped the command chair, his eyes narrowing with cold determination. The fleet was in disarray, and their enemies, no longer mere invaders, had become a terrifying reflection of humanity's own ruthlessness. Kane had fought battles before, but this felt different. There was something eerie in the way the Dron moved, as if they were always one step ahead, always waiting to strike before the humans could react. Yet, within that moment of despair, Kane found his clarity. The humans were not just soldiers, they were survivors, and they were about to remind the galaxy why they had once dominated the stars. "Adapt or die. Admiral, we can't hold them off much longer," Lieutenant Miravose called out, her voice crackling over the comm. The eclipse was barely holding together after the relentless assault. Several of the backup ships had already fallen, consumed by the Dron's swarming tactics. Despite their resilience, the human fleet was on the brink of collapse. Kane's mind raced. It was clear now that the Dron were not merely a threat to be fought conventionally. They were a new kind of enemy, an enemy that did not simply attack. The Dron learned, they adapted, and they evolved with every encounter. To defeat them, the humans would have to do the same. They could not rely on traditional tactics. It was time to take a page from the Dron's playbook. He turned to Zara Vox, who stood next to him, her eyes scanning the data feeds, her calm resolve betraying the anxiety she felt. "General, we need to think outside the box. What are our options?" Zara hesitated for a moment before responding, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've tried brute force, but these Dron, they don't fight like anything we've seen before. They evolve, adapt with every move we make. If we're going to win, we need to trick them. We need to make them fight on our terms." Kane's lips curled into a grim smile. "A bait and switch, I like it." The new plan. The plan was as dangerous as it was brilliant. Zara and Kane decided to use their own ship, the Eclipse, as bait. They would feign a retreat, leading the Dron into a trap. The key was to make them believe they had the upper hand, to make them think victory was inevitable. Once the Dron took the bait, the real attack would come. Kane gave the orders, and the fleet began to execute the maneuver. The Eclipse turned, its engines flaring with a sudden burst of speed as it headed toward the distant moon of the Len Prime system. Behind it, the remaining ships followed, retreating in what seemed like an uncontrollable rout. "Hold it together," Kane muttered to himself, watching as the Dron fleet began to follow, eager to end the humans' resistance once and for all. They'll be making the biggest mistake of their lives. The Dron's pursuit. The Dron fleet, sensing victory, pushed forward with renewed fury. Their ships cut through the void like predatory creatures, their movements swift and precise. The Hive Mother watched from her command center, her mind connected to the entire swarm. She felt the humans' desperation, but she also felt the unmistakable scent of fear. The battle had already been won. The humans, weakened and disorganized, were no longer a threat. She issued a silent command to her forces. Pursue them. Let them think they can escape. Finish this now. For a moment, the Drong were unaware of what was waiting. The humans had played their part well. The eclipse had led them into the trap, and now it was time to spring it. The trap closes. Without warning, the eclipse abruptly reversed course, its weapons charging for a full assault. The rest of the fleet, hidden behind a nearby asteroid belt, erupted from their positions, flanking the drone ships from all sides. Now, Kane shouted as the first wave of missiles launched, streaking through the dark expanse toward the drone command ships. The Eclipse unleashed its full arsenal, plasma cannons, guided torpedoes, and a barrage of laser fire, all aimed directly at the heart of the drone fleet. Caught off guard, the drone were thrown into chaos. The Hive Mother's mind rippled with confusion as her forces scrambled to adapt to the sudden shift in tactics. The swarm, usually so perfect in its coordination, began to falter as human ingenuity took center stage. The humans were no longer the hunted, they had become the hunters. The human edge. Zora's voice came through Kane's comm. "Admiral, we've got them on the ropes. Their ships are scattering. The diversion worked, they are panicking." Kane's eyes narrowed as he watched the battle unfold. He could see it now. The drone, once unyielding and relentless, were beginning to lose their composure. The humans had turned the tide, not with overwhelming force, but with intelligence, creativity, and sheer willpower. The Eclipse and its allies pressed the attack, focusing on the drone's weakest points. Human ships darted in and out of enemy lines, using evasive maneuvers that the drone hadn't anticipated. In contrast, the drone's once impressive unity was breaking down. They were starting to scatter, overwhelmed by the unpredictability of the human assault. "It's not over yet," Kane muttered, watching as the drone continued to fight back fiercely. They were an enemy like no other, relentless, efficient, and adaptable. But for the first time in this war, the drone were not the ones in control. The last push. Despite the shifting momentum, the drone was still dangerous. Their central command ships had not fallen, and the Hive Mother was quick to recalibrate her strategy. Her mind, vast and terrifying, reached out to her scattered forces. "Regroup," she ordered. "We will not lose to these humans." But Kane could feel it, the change in the air. The drone were no longer invincible, and with each new strike, the humans' confidence grew. Zora's fleet was relentless, pressing forward with calculated precision. Kane, however, knew that this fight wasn't won yet. There was still too much at stake. The drone might scatter now, but they would return stronger, more relentless than before. Humanity had won this battle, but the war was far from over. With a final push, the Eclipse targeted the last of the drone's command ships. The crew braced themselves as the massive enemy vessel shattered under a barrage of missiles and laser fire. The Hive Mother's consciousness screamed out in frustration as the control center of her fleet was torn apart. "We did it," Zora said, a tired but triumphant smile crossing her face. Kane didn't smile. "Not yet. We've only won the first round."